Mayorkas is going to get up there and he's going to thumb his nose at Cruz and everyone else that is questioning him because he simply doesn't want to do what the law requires him to do.
But because Ted Cruz advocates for law and order, he's a villain.
Yeah, I mean, I hear him going, oh, smugglers are taking advantage of this. Yeah, of course they are, because you're permitting them to do it. Hello, and welcome to No Border, No Country, the Immigration Reform Law Institute's podcast. Today we have something interesting and not particularly unusual around Washington, but somewhat gratifying. The Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, gave testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee, and how would you put it, Brian? Fireworks?
It was grotesque in many ways, Matt. It was just a spectacle and really shameful when you get right down to it. I mean, what the damage that's been done in this area by this man and his lack of leadership has just been staggering.
Well, I think I'd put it in plain English saying he looked like a buffoon.
Yeah.
I mean, clearly this is an individual who doesn't know what he's doing in his job. That was my experience when I worked with him. He was the director of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services when I was there running the National Security Division, and let's say I wasn't impressed.
As grotesque as what you're about to see is, this is what amounts to accountability by this administration, because, as you know, these press conferences with Karine Jean-Pierre are almost as maddening, but to get a cabinet head in front of a camera to answer questions from the opposing side is so rare in Washington today that even this, you almost can't look away, because finally they're at least going to be confronted with the facts of their own mismanagement.
And then I think the other thing to note, as gratifying as this is all political theater,
right?
And it remains to be seen whether anything meaningful will happen. While my hat's off to Cruz and Hawley and others who let Mayorkas have it, there's an open question as to whether Congress will get its act together and attempt to straighten this out. But let's let our audience members have a look.
Is there a crisis at our southern border?
Senator, there is a very significant...
That's a yes or no question. Is there a crisis?
Senator, there's a very significant challenge.
I think your microphone is on.
There is a very significant challenge that we are facing.
Yes or no, is there a crisis?
I believe I've addressed that question.
So you're refusing to answer?
Senator,
there's... So I'm watching this, Brian, and I'm going... It reminded me of the old Joe Isuzu commercials. He's lying.
He's off to a very poor start because he can't answer the most basic questions there are. And he says, I've addressed that. No, he hasn't. He said, the border is closed. Well, all evidence to the contrary. But what he's engaging in here is an age-old trick in Washington politics, and it's called run out the clock. Because of the parameters of these kind of hearings, I believe they've got 5 minutes per senator. That's not a long time to have a meaningful discussion about policy. So basically, he's trying to give the most long-winded answers possible to cut down the amount of time he'll have to take any more questions. And he's just trying to run out the clock, basically.
Well, here's the other thing. If you talk to a Democrat that supports the agenda that this administration is after, or for that matter, some of the Republicans who support this agenda, there isn't a crisis. This is the greatest thing that ever happened. If you're anti-borders, globalist, y'all want to join hands and sing "We Are the World," then clearly this is a good thing, because there are massive numbers of people who are being let into the U.S. Right. But I think as we go forward, it's interesting. Cruz, who was a trial attorney for a significant portion of his career before he went into politics, handles Mayorkas exactly the way you handle a recalcitrant witness on the stand in a trial. Yes. So let's see the fireworks.
Therefore, we are dedicating the resources.
Okay, so you're refusing to answer. Well, Secretary Mayorkas, I'll tell you someone who is willing to answer, which is your and President Biden's chief of the Border Patrol in a sworn deposition in July of 2022 when asked Would you agree, Chief Ortiz, that the southern border is currently in crisis? Answer, yes. Notice none of those wiggle words, none of that equivocation. One word, one syllable, yes. Are you willing to speak with the same clarity as Chief Ortiz? Is there a crisis at our southern border, yes or no?
Senator, I'm very proud to work alongside.
Oh, you refuse to answer. Let me ask you the next question.
Tell me that at the White House they're not sizing up Ortiz's replacement, because he's gone way off script for this administration. You're not supposed to say the things he said.
No, well, what he did was he was honest,
Right.
and that's not acceptable in Biden land. So I would say, yeah, he's probably on his way out. He needs to be looking for a new career. But here's the other thing, and this is, a lot of people don't realize this, but there's a legal obligation of the Department of Homeland Security to secure the border. It comes out of the Secure Fence Act of 2006, and there's a definition of operational control of the border. And in plain English, what it basically says is the goal is to have no gotaways and to prohibit any terrorists, criminals, or just plain old illegal aliens from getting through. Now, most people would take a look at that and they would go, well, that's, how practical is that? Nobody can seal off the border. On the other hand, there's been two different operations. There's Operation Hold the Line and Operation Gatekeeper that the Border Patrol did in the 90s. And in the sections where they did these, and Hold the Line was perhaps the best example, they just put Border Patrol agents within sight of each other on the border. And then they had teams of agents behind them. So it was like that game you play in recess in school where you all join hands, people break through, and then you have the people afterwards to go tag them. Right. They basically did the same thing with the Border Patrol, and they reduced the unlawful migration in that section to zero. Operation Gatekeeper used a little bit of different model in the San Diego sector, which has been since the 60s overrun with smugglers and drug dealers, reduced unlawful migration by something like 80%. And then in the areas where the Trump wall was completed, despite what critics have said about that, it effectively stopped all of this. So Mayorkas is up here dancing around like a cat on hot coals, trying to avoid answering this question, when the fact is this is a crisis of the Department of Homeland Security's own making to meet the one world, border-free globalist agenda of the Biden administration. And if they wanted to, they could solve all of this within a few days by simply taking the Gatekeeper Hold the Line model and re-implementing it.
Right. Let's get back to the act.
Southern border made Americans less safe, yes or no?
Senator, we are dedicated to the safety.
Has the crisis made Americans less safe? I don't want a discourse. It's a yes or no question.
Senator, we have a challenge of...
You refuse to answer the question. Mr. Secretary, let me show you how someone doing his job answers a question in a straightforward manner. Chief Ortiz, is the crisis that is currently ongoing at the southern border making the border less safe for Americans and aliens alike? Answer, yes. One word, one syllable, 3 letters. That's how someone answers a question and does their job. You're being a politician misleading the American people. Let me give you a chance again. Will you show the same integrity Chief Ortiz shows? Is the crisis at the southern border making Americans less safe? Yes or no?
Senator, we have 260,000...
You refuse to answer the question. Let's move on.
And security of the...
Next question, Mr. Mayorkas. Has the crisis made aliens less safe? Yes or no?
Senator, we are seeking...
So you won't answer that question either. It is...
Here's an interesting thing. They clearly have a hidden agenda with regards to border policy. These are people, his side is really tight with the media. They have friends in Hollywood, all these things. You would think they would have better material than that. Because at least if he's going to evade like that, he'd have better material than these sort of Miss America pageant answers like, at DHS we strive to blah, blah, blah. Who's buying that? Nobody's buying that. Why doesn't he have... I'm just shocked he's got such poor material.
Well, nobody's buying that, but the thing is that Joe Biden and Ali Mayorkas have no respect for the rule of law. So, this isn't a strictly legal thing. I mean, you can be held in contempt of Congress. You can be subpoenaed to testify before Congress. But as a political appointee in the government, he's obligated to go up there, and he's supposed to give Congress answers to the things they want to know. Now, he doesn't work for Congress. He's an executive branch officer. The branches of government are co-equal. But once upon a time, people who worked in government acted in good faith. So, people may be watching this, they may be going, he's lying, he's this, he's that, I can't believe it. This is intentional. Okay, I've sat in rooms and discussed immigration issues with Ali Mayorkas, and the guy's got the moral compass of a Soviet gulag guard. I cannot reinforce enough that this is an individual who the agenda means everything. Reality shouldn't interfere with the agenda, and the law shouldn't interfere with the agenda. But what I want the audience to understand is this is not somebody who's got a coherent view of immigration enforcement that differs from Ted Cruz's. This is, Ali Mayorkas is going to get up there and he's going to thumb his nose at Cruz and everyone else that is questioning him because he simply doesn't want to do what the law requires him to do. So this is the face of somebody who is ignoring the Immigration and Nationality Act and is ignoring his responsibilities as an executive branch official to enforce the laws as written by Congress. Cruz called him out on it and has pointed out that he's not doing his job proficiently, and he doesn't want to hear that because he is part of this crew that believes that the United States, as we know it, and as we believe in it, suffers from some kind of an ideological deficit which he's going about correcting. And that's the problem here.
Okay, hit it.
Aliens less safe.
Senator, smugglers are exploiting...
Has the crisis made aliens, less safe? Are you willing to answer it?
This is all smugglers, as if the smugglers haven't picked up on the fact that the Biden administration has hung a neon sign on the border saying, come on in, we're open for business. I mean, this is like the movie with Kevin Costner, build it and they will come. People in other countries aren't stupid. They calculate opportunity costs. And if you're a person who has not been able to get here because you don't qualify for a way to get here under the immigration laws as they exist, what are you going to do? You're going to wait for an administration like this and this joker Mayorkas to come in here and ignore the law. And then once you get here, you have all kinds of strange things happen. Back under the Trump administration, the courts kept talking about reliance interests. Now, reliance interest is a concept that comes from contracts, and basically it says, if I tell you, hey, Brian, I want you to sell me that car you have over there, and I'll give you X amount of dollars for it. You go, great, and you make preparations to sell it, but then I say, oh, no, I didn't mean that. I don't want to pay that for it. You relied on the promise I made, and you made a business decision based on that. You're counting on the money. So a court can force us to consummate that contract and you to sell the car to me. Reliance interests don't have anything to do with constitutional law, and yet the courts came up with this thing that under DACA, these people were relying on Barack Obama's illegal action to allow them to stay in the United States, which of course anybody with half a brain is going, gee, no kidding, but it was still illegal. And the courts interpreted this as this silly reason for trying to extend the DACA program and for saying that Trump wasn't able to eject the DACA people who had been unlawfully allowed to stay. This is the kind of craziness that prevails in all of this. So this is, I mean, I hear him going, oh, smugglers are taking advantage of this. Yeah, of course they are, because you're permitting them to do it.
The smuggling organizations...
Okay, you're filibustering again. Let me ask you this question. How many migrants have died under President Biden?
Senator, your phrasing of the question...
Okay, that number is somewhere around 800.
How many migrants died in 2022?
Approaching our southern border?
Yes.
Precisely why we are seeking to
exclude this. Do you know the answer? Do you know how many died?
I do not.
You do not. Of course you don't. I know.
He's got no facts at his fingertips either. Have you noticed that?
853. And by the way, here are the numbers that have died every year. You go back to 1998, you see it's consistently between 300 and 400, 300, 400, 300, 400. Suddenly, 2021, what happens? You get in office,
that chart is devastating there. Look at that red line.
Bodies. I've been on the Rio Grande, and I've seen dead bodies floating there who drowned because of your refusal to do your job. You don't even know how many have died. What do you say to the Texas farmers and ranchers who find pregnant ladies dead on their property, who find toddlers dead on their property? What do you say to them?
I say that is why precisely We are taking it to the smuggling organization.
But you are not. That is simply not true.
What are they taking to the smuggling organizations besides more business? I mean, the way you take it to the smuggling organizations is you do what Donald Trump did. You build walls, you force Mexico to not let these people transit its territory, and then you engage in prosecutions of everybody you catch that you can get into court on criminal charges. And then what happens is the opportunity costs for the smugglers reduce, and the smugglers go, maybe I should stick to bringing drugs in places that aren't so visible because this is too controversial. But that hasn't happened. They've done the exact opposite. They're not bringing it to the smugglers. They're bringing business to the smugglers' doorsteps by allowing everyone that shows up to get smuggled here to come into the United States, where Ali Mayorkas and his team know these people are not likely to be removed because ICE has to first find them. Then they go in front of the immigration court, which I'm a living example of how that's been weaponized by the Biden administration, where they've purged all the Trump-appointed judges and are trying to handicap all the other conservative judges. And they're turning that into a big benefit-granting machine. So this is like, it's like, how do you know Ali Mayorkas is lying? His lips are moving.
We'll be right back.
I'm Tom Homan. The Biden administration is reversing America's progress on immigration, reversing ICE's ability to deport criminal illegal aliens, reversing job protections for Americans, and construction of the wall. That's why I've joined EARLY, the Immigration Reform Law Institute. EARLY uses the courts to stop bad immigration policies. Join me. Support EARLY at early.org. Help win the immigration fight in the courtroom. Paid for by the Immigration Reform Law Institute.
So this gets kind of interesting here.
On behalf of the President of the United States, this is a photograph from just one day along the Rio Grande of hundreds of thousands of people walking across the border. You have allowed this to happen. The photograph that was before. What are these wristbands?
I don't know what they are.
You don't know what they are. Mr. Secretary, you
Please.
just testified to the American
There's
people
no way
you're
he doesn't know what those
accommodating
are.
your job. Because I've been to the southern border, and if you go to the southern border, along the southern border, you see thousands of these wristbands because the illegal immigrants wear them. The drug cartels, every color corresponds to how many thousands of dollars they owe the cartels. You've turned these cartels into multi-billion-dollar criminal organizations, and these are modern-day leg irons because these
let's
are
pause this for a
children
moment.
being sold.
So for anybody in the audience that's not familiar with this kind of stuff, I've throughout my career dealt with all kinds of this. The alien smugglers are very organized. This is a business. This isn't some guy like you see in the movies that wants to scare up a few extra bucks and is bringing people over with a load of Mexican cotija cheese in the back of his semi, or some guy with a junky car bringing people through. This is a sophisticated operation. So they actually separate these people into categories, and they use these wristbands that look like the type of thing you'd get going into a nightclub or an amusement park. And they're color-coded depending upon which cartel is doing business. They change them frequently so the aliens that they're smuggling can't figure out what the color coding system is. And these colors show what people owe, but they also show things like whether the person's being transported to go into sexual slavery, whether the person's being transported to work in a sweatshop in Los Angeles, whether they're going to a meat packing place in the Deep South or in Texas. I mean, it's really, when Cruz says, Senator Cruz, that this is modern day leg irons, he's not kidding. This is like the kind of stuff that went on in slave markets in other parts of the world during the 16, 17, and 1800s. And it's going on now. And the scary part is that a lot of people in south of the border, and we're not just seeing people coming from Central and South America now, we're seeing people from Africa, Asia, the Middle East. These people are willingly subjecting themselves to get here, not because, as the globalist left would tell you, they're so desperate to get here. It's because the cartels have a lock on the routes into the United States. And they just recently had an incident in the San Diego Border Patrol sector. I think it was San Diego. It was either San Diego or Texas. But there were some, I don't know if it was on camera or if it was Border Patrol agents, but they witnessed these cartel members shooting at and stoning these two individuals who were trying to make it across the border. And it turns out that they killed these people because they were using the entry route into the United States without permission. That's how sophisticated this has come. This is a corporate human slavery, human chattel entity. And so this is not Senator Cruz being dramatic at all. And he's right. It is truly disgraceful that Mayorkas will sit up there with a straight face and claim that he doesn't know what's going on.
The other thing about this, you worked in the federal government for decades, right?
Yes.
Don't believe for a second that this guy just showed up on Capitol Hill one day and just had all these questions thrown at him. This is a guy who heads an agency that at last count had a budget of $82 billion. He's got endless staffers. He comes in with a crew of staff. They've got big binders full of data in it. He prepared for this testimony.
Yeah, he spent 2 weeks before this with people doing what's called a murder board here in Washington, where everybody throws in the toughest questions so he can attempt to answer them.
So to think that this guy, well, give him a break. He couldn't have known that fact. He could have and he should have known all these figures that they're asking him about. It's just willful ignorance. He's just playing this game where he pretends it's Sergeant Schultz.
No, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, I was involved in preparing him on several occasions, but also other people to go up and testify on the Hill. And the fact is that when we would show up for these preparations or when they would ask us for documents, you know, you're listing all kinds of things in charts, facts, figures, all this kind of stuff. And it is the most disingenuous, flat out deceitful thing in the entire world for him to sit up there and pretend, one, he doesn't know what the bracelets are. Number two, he doesn't know anything about the numbers. Number three, he's not aware of XYZ. And what a number of our viewers may not know is the Border Patrol actually maintains one of the world's elite rescue teams. It's called Border Star, Border Patrol Search, Trauma, and Rescue. A good friend of mine that I worked with at ICE in New York had been a Border Patrol agent, had been on Borstar. And Borstar's entire function is they have helicopters, they get a large team, they're all trained as high-level paramedics. And when these people get lost in the desert trying to make their way to the U.S., the Border Patrol goes out and rescues them. So somehow portraying the Border Patrol as the globalists have, as these sort of jackbooted thugs that keep people from going over the border is not accurate. I mean, the Border Patrol saves... I wrote about this when I was at FAIR, and I want to say an average of like 1,500 or 1,600 people a year that otherwise would have died in the desert on their way to the United States.
Do you think those units, that those agents are being properly utilized under this administration, or are they changing diapers at the point of entry like we hear about?
No, I'm still in contact with a lot of people that I worked with that are at CBP, that are members of the Border Patrol, which is part of CBP, and that are ICE detention enforcement or deport officers, and they have said to a person, we're tired of this, we don't want to be babysitters. And they're losing qualified people. I mean, you know, from working in immigration for a long time, immigration is complicated. There's a steep learning curve. It takes you a while to learn about the INA, the Immigration Nationality Act, and how it works. And so what happens every time you get an administration like this, or the Obama administration coming in, you have a mass exodus of experienced people who go to other law enforcement agencies. People that did the kind of work I do tend to go to the CIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and people who are engaged in the boots on the ground, badges and guns work tend to go to, they'll move over to TSA and become federal air marshals, or they move over to the Federal Marshal Service. And it's terrible. And the Democrats are aware of this, and I swear that a lot of it is an intentional effort to sort of undermine the immigration enforcement mechanism and keep it off balance on a decades-long basis.
All right, let's finish this up, and then we'll hear what Josh Hawley had to say.
Sex slavery, and you don't even know what they are. That is astonishing. Mr. Secretary, how many children have been sold into sex slavery under your administration?
Senator, we are taking it to the cartel.
How many children have been sold into sex slavery? Do you know how many children have been sold into sex slavery?
To an unprecedented degree.
Mr. Secretary, I want to say to you right now, your behavior is disgraceful, and the deaths, the children assaulted, the children raped, they are at your feet, and if you had integrity, you would resign. And I will tell you, the men and women of the Border Patrol, they've never had a political leader undermine them. They despise you, Mr. Secretary, because you're willing to let children be raped to follow political orders. This is a crisis, it's a disgrace, and you won't even admit this human tragedy is a crisis.
Wow.
Claiming 1 minute Chairman time. Mr. Secretary, would you like to
Go ahead and
respond?
stop that.
Hold on one second. This is good.
I'm not going to.
So what the senator said was revolting. Senator Cruz asking him about this was revolting. The fact that children are being sold into slavery and are being raped by cartel members while they're being brought to the United States is not revolting. What's revolting is that Senator Cruz had the temerity to ask the sainted Ali Mayorkas about it during a hearing. I mean, can you believe these people?
If the ideologies were reversed, if you had a senator as articulate and as forceful as Cruz on their side, saying things with the passion that he was saying them, that guy would be lionized. They'd be making Hollywood movies about him. But because Ted Cruz advocates for law and order, he's a villain.
Well, and you know, if our viewers want to see something to compare this to, there is footage on YouTube of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez questioning Tom Homan. And Tom Homan is a bona fide expert in this kind of stuff.
Legendary piece of video that was, yeah.
Yeah, and it first of all, AOC was neither as organized or articulate as Ted Cruz, but she was trying to play these gotcha games with Tom, and of course that didn't work in her favor because Tom's an extremely smart, very experienced guy, and I think AOC may have 2 brain cells to rub together. She's lucky.
Well, all she had, and a lot of the people on her side have when they question people like that is, well, you don't care about children. You're okay with children dying. And he came back with great responses in that and another video where he said, I've held children in my arms who were dying, and it was horrible. And so they've got no higher moral ground than him when it comes to things like that.
Well, they always try and rely on emotional arguments, and the emotional argument, the way they set it up here, is America is somehow bad and responsible for all of the ills in the rest of the world. Therefore, it's not nice if we won't let people in. But of course, there's a problem there, because if America's so bad, why is it that everyone else in the world wants to come here and they're doing it in droves?
Right. Okay, let's watch our next clip. So this is Senator Josh Hawley from Missouri taking over with Mayorkas.
Well, it's CBP1, an app for a cell phone. I've got a picture of it behind me here. This phone app allows, and I'm going to quote from your own fact sheet, it allows, and I quote, non-citizens without appropriate documents for admission to schedule an appointment to come to the border. They can now go on their phone and schedule a time to come to the border and then be admitted. And you identified 7 separate border points of entry where they could come. 5 of them in Texas, 2 of them in California, 1 in Arizona. It's like a concierge service for illegal immigrants. My question is, you didn't think the border crisis was bad enough that now we're going to have an app that allows illegals to schedule their appointments and come and be admitted to this country?
Senator, you're mischaracterizing the use of the application. Let me explain it to you.
All right, pause this for a moment.
Now, give us the real version of what he's about to explain here.
Well, the real version of what he's about to explain here is that they have basically created open table for illegal aliens. And if you're coming to the United States, the way the Immigration and Nationality Act reads is you are supposed to present yourself at a port of entry with appropriate documents, which at a minimum is a passport and a visa, unless you meet the legal definition of a refugee and you're planning to apply for asylum, and then identity documents are ideal, everything else is icing on the cake. But what they have done is unilaterally, without having Congress change the Immigration and Nationality Act, put up this app. And what happens with the app? Well, you put your name in and you say, I'm, Joe Smith, unlawful migrant. Shows up at the border, meets with the Customs and Border Protection inspectors or the Border Patrol agents, whoever happen to be staffing that point, and goes, I want to come to America. Okay, and if that calls to mind West Side Story and the I Want to Go to America song, then that's just how silly this is. And Border Patrol or CBP inspectors go, okay, fine, great, you come in. And there's a problem because the Immigration and Nationality Act requires, it says that absolutely everyone who comes to the border is presumed to be an immigrant unless proven otherwise. So if you're a U.S. citizen, you establish that with documents, boom, you're free to come in. It's your country. You have an unfettered right to come in. If you're seeking admission as an alien, then you have to fit into one of two classes, and that is either an immigrant, you're being processed for a green card. So everyone is presumed to be an immigrant unless they prove otherwise. If you're an immigrant and you don't have the papers that say you're an immigrant, that you've gone through the Department of State and been pre-cleared to enter the U.S. as a lawful permanent resident, then you're by definition a non-immigrant, which means you have to prove that you fit into one of the alphabet soup of visa categories that are all identified with a letter. And if you can't do that, then you can't be let in unless you fit into some exceptional status like being paroled into the United States. So with these jokers working under Mayorkas, and I'm talking about the high-level people, not the line agents and the men and women that are doing the hard work, but these jokers in the policy positions are saying, oh, just let these people in. Well, boss, what are we supposed to do? Are we supposed to parole them? Are we supposed to, what status do we put them? No, just let them in. And so some of these people are being paroled, but some of them are just being waived into the country. Now, I mentioned Open Table before. On Open Table, if you cancel your reservation at the last minute, they either take away your points or they charge you a fee, or that restaurant won't take your reservation anymore. Well, we get thousands of people are showing up through this app that then disappear into the interior of the United States, and they're gone. And there's no recourse because, as we'll see as this video goes on, what are they doing once these people are put into the app? They're not asking them any questions about anything. They're just waving them in. Come on in. This is fantastic.
Okay, hit it.
Enforcing the public health order of Title 42, and I know you're very familiar with it. There is a process for individuals who claim an exception to the Title 42 expulsion authority because of an acute medical condition.
Well, let's talk about this app.
If I may finish, an urgent humanitarian reason. So instead of them coming in between the ports of entry to claim that urgent medical condition.
Oh, yes, they set this all up so all the really sick people that have cancer and COVID can come in at a port of entry.
We allow a limited number to arrive at our ports of entry and
He's
seek
just filibustering at this point
that they need.
Schedule you allow them. Let's be particular about
And
what
I
you do.
should say that the CBP One app was not unveiled for the first time on January 5th of this year.
Oh no, but you changed it. You made it available on January 5th to the illegals themselves. You don't have to be a lawyer to use it. You don't have to be a member of a non-governmental organization. Anybody can download the app and use it on their phone. And for the first time, you allow them to schedule appointments. Now let's talk about what actually happens when they come to the border. It's interesting. You characterize this when you rolled it out as an application for applying for asylum.
This is the real important part right
nowhere
here.
on the app do you actually require the illegal migrants to apply for asylum or to claim asylum or anything about asylum. And in fact, when they then get to the border, you don't ask them questions, you don't do interviews, you just release them. Here's the Texas Monthly, not a notable conservative outlet, who reports, and I quote, "At no point does the app ask users, are you seeking asylum? Those arriving for the CBP One appointments are given no interviews, asked no questions about vulnerabilities that they may or may not have listed in the app or about why they're coming to the United States. They're simply released into the country," end quote. So rather than building a wall, Mr. Secretary, you have built Ticketmaster for illegal immigrants.
You are, Senator, you are conflating programs. Let me explain
Well, just
to you.
respond to this. Is it true that they are given no interviews, asked no questions, and simply released into the country?
Let me explain to you what we announced on January 5th.
No, I want you to explain to me what's happening. I know what you announced. I read it to you.
So I will
Pause it there.
explain to you.
All right, Matt, we got to get out of here in a minute, but as concisely as possible, does he have a leg to stand on here? I mean, it sounded like Hawley has him nailed to rights. Is there any defense he can offer that's legitimate?
No, none whatsoever. Now, we don't have time to watch the whole thing, but he was on to try and claim that these people are all being scheduled for interviews in front of asylum officers, and Hawley points out that to the extent that any of them are being scheduled for anything, they're being put into removal proceedings where they can then seek asylum. This is just Mayorkas is sitting there trying to delude people who know exactly what's going on, and it's not working for him, which is why this wound up the way it did. And it's like I said, this is not him getting up there and getting sandbagged by people with some sort of agenda. This is people who understand the immigration system asking him legitimate questions, and he's the one with the agenda who is sandbagging the senators. Thank you for watching this episode of No Border, No Country. Do us a favor, please. Stab the like button, subscribe, and visit our website at www.early.org to learn about Early's mission and what we're doing to try and save the United States, maintain the integrity of our borders, and preserve the sovereignty of our country. Thanks again.